Thank you for joining us, Mr. Martin Rama. Could you make a review on the Vietnam's economy's performance in 2008?
2008 was a very challenging year for Vietnam. It started with the economy overheating, inflation, real estate prices going up, and the government had to handle that and stabilize the economy. And it did a very good job, I must say. But when finally inflation started going down, came a second crisis, and that was the global crisis. So it was a very challenging year. And overall, when you look at what was accomplished, I think there is much for the government to be proud and for the Vietnamese people to be proud about.
What was the country's response to the global economic downturn?
It's difficult to anticipate how serious or for how long the global downturn will last. It is also difficult to tell how Vietnam will be affected compared to other countries. We don't know how difficult or in which ways. And the policy response depends very much on that. The government has been quick this time to recognize that there is a problem, even quicker than with inflation, I would say. As soon as the slowdown started in October, the global slowdown, it started taking measures. It announced the 5 groups of measures. Now the last cabinet meeting, yesterday in fact, came out with more specific things, and I suspect that there will be adjustments along the way, and that's the right way to go.
Could you give the reason for the domestic petroleum high prices despite a huge fall in world crude oil prices?
It's always an issue, the transmission of foreign prices to domestic prices in oil. When you look at the experience last year, at some point oil prices were going up and domestic prices of gasoline were not going up by the same extent, and there was a gap that needed to be covered. The policy of the government of Vietnam is to remove any subsidy. So one would expect that when prices go up internationally, they go up domestically. But one will, of course, also expect prices to go down. Perhaps what this is telling us is that there is not enough competition yet in the market for gasoline, and this is something that will require attention.
What led to a free fall in the stock market and a freezing properties market?
For the real estate, it was needed. When you think at what happened in industrial countries, the crisis we are seeing now, it started with the subprime mortgage crisis. It started with a real estate bubble where people were buying property without having the money for property. These things are very dangerous. Japan had a decade with no growth due to a real estate bubble that went for too long. The US, the UK had similar bubbles. In Vietnam, government reacted relatively quickly. And of course, it's painful for those who invested, or even especially for those who were speculating. But from an economic point of view, that was the right thing to do. Killing the real estate bubble was a priority. That is a very dangerous thing from a macroeconomic perspective. Now, the stock market also suffered. But again, in a way, remember December 2007, when everybody was opening investment funds, everybody was thinking that you could get rich by just buying things and selling things. That's not the way to get rich. The way to get rich is to save and to work hard and to have good ideas and innovate. The fact that that was slowed down is good. Now, it will take time for the stock market to pick up. The good thing is when you look at the number of listings, the stock market in Vietnam has done relatively well. Now is the time to reinvigorate it with the large equitizations, to bring in new investments that are attractive, and for people who have a long-term perspective, who realize that Vietnam in the medium term will be doing well. That may gradually bring the stock market back to life in a way.
For the first time, the government revised down the GDP growth target twice in a year. Could you give the reason why?
The economic news and the forecasts were getting worse, and the government internationally, and the government is reacting to that. There were indications, for instance, of the kind of orders that the garment exporters were getting that suggested that the economic downturn was very serious. How serious it will be, again, is very difficult to tell. So it's prudent of the government to revise down and to even to allow, as it said, 6.5, but could be less depending on the circumstance.
Please make an evaluation of the government's stimulus package.
A stimulus package of 1 billion, like the government is considering now, seems a reasonable first response. And then the specifics are what is important. We saw some announcements coming from the cabinet meeting yesterday. In general, they go in the right direction, I would say. But again, there will be a need to adjust, as we see, especially after that, what is happening.
What measures should be taken to tackle the current issues, including the two-digit inflation and commodities high prices?
Well, high inflation is much less of an issue now. At this point, commodities prices are going down. Even core inflation in Vietnam is starting to go down. So the main risk for the economy at this point is on economic activity more than on inflation. And I would say overall, when you look at 2008, when there was high inflation, the center of the response of the 8 measures was still monetary policy, was the contraction in credit and some fiscal policy. But the center was monetary policy. Now that the problem is the slowdown, it makes sense to have the center as fiscal policy. So the way helping spending, for instance, helping people with limited resources, like with this debt bonus that people are talking about, to support consumption, because that will be good for them, but also will be good for companies that are selling products for everybody to protect employment. So this kind of fiscal, what is called fiscal policy, is probably what should be at the center of the response, in the same way as monetary policy was at the center of the response to high inflation.
Thank you for joining us.